Not every consulting project turns out well, but some of them do get turned into case interview questions that you might encounter in your case interviews. Today, I'm going to share with you 5 examples of failed case studies that you might actually encounter in your case interviews. When it comes to failed case projects, there's a lot of themes, but there's 5 that stick out with me, and I'm going to share with you from my experience at Bain about how I encountered each of these, and an example of one that actually got turned into a case interview. So not only are you going to learn more about the consulting project, but you're also going to learn about how to take the failures and actually apply that to success in your case interviews. Number 5, undefined success metrics. As a consultant, you would think that when working with clients, you would align on what success looks like. But oftentimes, the client and the firm have a different definition of what success looks like. For example, there was one case that I was working on when we were trying to figure out how to increase the revenue for a particular company. And this was the first time that this company had been using management consultants. Even though they were a billion-dollar company, we thought that, well, if we can find ways to increase their revenues by 20% while keeping them profitable, 20% growth is actually really good. But later on, when we presented our PowerPoint slides and our initial studies and our initial projections, they're like, 20%? What are we paying you for? Like, we're expecting like 40%. So that was a misalignment of expectations. So how this got turned into a case study is that there is a case that is used where you're going to grow the revenues of the company. But one of the questions you should probably ask in the beginning is, how much growth are they expecting? 10%, 20%, 30%, 40%? What are their expectations and under what time? So for example, they might have a 40% growth target, but if they're trying to grow 40% within 1 year, and you give them a plan that's 40% over 5 years, they're probably not going to be happy. And the case interview is not going to go well for you. So if you ever encounter a metric where someone's trying to grow or achieve some kind of metric, really ask, what does success look like? Number 4 is not asking stupid questions early enough. So there was a case project I was involved with where the client wanted us to increase their gross profits. And well, when I joined the project, there was already a deck that was built out about what the gross profit, how we defined it, and so forth. But what we later found out 2 weeks later is that no one ran this deck by the client. Well, how does the client define gross profits? So for example, in our situation, we defined it as simply revenues minus the cost of service. So everything that it takes, the labor and everything to actually make the good and to produce it. But for the client, it was also the cost of acquiring the potential customers as well. So the marketing was part of it. So we left that equation out. So our projections were quite off. So what this means is that in case interview questions, and this comes up a lot, is that if there's a definition, you want to define what it means so everyone's on the same page. So for example, if you encounter something called contribution margin or contribution profits, you probably lay out, wait, just so I understand, contribution profits, do you mean that contribution profits equals revenues minus cost of goods sold, minus marketing costs, minus sales costs, or is there any other additional costs that you would put under contribution profits? Just to make sure that both sides are on the same page. This shows that you're already thinking ahead. Number 3 is underestimating resources. There was one project I was on. It was early on, one of my first 6 months at Bain. And this project was just supposed to be a simple exercise with a client for 2 months. And it was supposed to be a team of 3.5 consultants. 3.5 meaning that one consultant was half-time, the manager actually, because she was half-time on another project. And then all of a sudden, it became a team of 12 people. Actually, we had to add 9 more consultants, including myself, to this project because, well, it was just under-resourced because Bain, as well as the client, didn't quite understand how much resources were needed. And so eventually what ended up happening was that was a project where I probably ended up working 18-hour days for weeks at a time. And I'll tell you, on the weekends, I've never slept better. And after the case was done, the whole team was just given a week off. And you'll encounter this in case interviews as well, where you're given a lot of options, but your team and the client simply can't do everything. So you have to prioritize which ones matters. And usually when you're prioritizing, you want to look at 2 things. You want to look at how much the impact is going to be. So for example, if the client is trying to cut cost, which one is going to save them the most cost? And then the second thing you want to do is figure out which one is quickest to implement. So for example, something that saves $10 million in 1 year is going to be likely more impressive than something that saves $15 million, but it takes 2 years. Case failure number 2 is failing to think about the team morale. So I had one case project where the manager was up for promotion to being a principal and eventually on her track to being a partner. And as a result of that, she basically worked us really hard. As in, if a client said, hey, we need to do something, she was like, yep, let's do it. Because she wanted to impress the client for them to continue working with us. And thus she can go to the partner on the case and say, hey, look, I retained the client. This was originally supposed to be a 6-month project and they extended for 18 months. And that's because of me. And so she continued to just keep pushing us and pushing us and pushing us. So even though the deliverables got done, by the time that her evaluations for promotion came on, one of her performance committee review members called me and said, hey, would you work with this manager again? I'm like, absolutely not. So this shows that as a consultant, you have to really think about your team. And so in a case interview, this is a case study that you'll likely encounter in a second round when you have to balance priorities within the team to figure out, well, do you go for this client demand or do you not do it? And this is a judgment call. Usually a manager or a partner will ask you this question because they want to think that, in a few years, you're going to be a manager of a team. I want to see how you're thinking about that. Are you going to be the type of person that is sustainable and the team members want to continue working with you? Or are you someone who's just going to burn out their team? And as a result, you're going to have great results, but then the team's going to resent you. And likely some of the consultants might actually quit the firm because of that project. And the number one case failure I had was a 2-month project with a biotech company. And we were building out a plan to launch one of their new drugs. And what they needed to do was clear the financials, clear the operations, clear the marketing. And we've done all that. And then finally, halfway through the project, we have a meeting and we realized that we had never cleared it with the CFO. And the CFO, unbeknownst to us, actually had a lot of say into which projects were going to be moved ahead and which ones were going to be paused. And because we didn't have buy-in from the CFO, it actually delayed our project. So now we had to spend time with the CFO, with the finance department to make sure that everything was up to their approval before we can actually go through. What this meant was that all of a sudden, Bain went from having this 2-month project to all of a sudden not getting paid for an additional month. As consultants, we got paid, but the firm didn't get paid because, well, that was our mistake. And so the mistake that happened here was that we didn't have buy-in from all of the stakeholders. And so what you want to be able to do is, as a consultant, you want to make sure that every single person who needs an approval on something gets it done. So for example, imagine that when you were a kid, certain things you probably went to your dad for, certain things you went for your mom for, certain things you need to go to both parents for. Same thing in consulting. When working with clients, you need to figure out who has the approval to make sure that your recommendations can actually have some results for the client. So eventually, this became a brainstorming prompt where the question was, could you brainstorm all the people who we probably need approval for before we can move on with this project? And obviously, some people will say, well, we need approval from the CEO, we need approval from the marketing team, from the operations team, from the supply chain team. But oftentimes, they mention the finance team because a lot of this needs to be financed from the finance team. That is the tricky part of that prompt there, is to make sure that you cover all the stakeholders. So those are the biggest 5 case project failures that eventually got turned into case interviews. I hope this video was able to help you get closer to landing your offer, and once you become a consultant, to avoid the mistakes that my team and I went through. But I also want to continue to help you as well. So I'm curious, which failure was the most surprising to you? I'd love to hear it in the comments below. And as a thank you, what I'll do is if you list out and comment out the failure, I'll send you some additional resources to help you with your case interview prep. For example, if you found neglecting team morale was the biggest surprise for you, put neglecting team morale below and I'll send you an additional resource. And the second way I want to help you is that I want to give you free access to a training that my team and I just put together. Here at My Consulting Offer, we've helped over 800 people start their careers in management consulting. And how we've done that is being able to help them land interviews and pass interviews. In fact, we have a 90% success rate. That means that 9 out of 10 people who go through our training actually land at least one offer. And so for a limited time, I'm actually going to provide free access to one of our free trainings that we just hosted. You can find that in the link below. And I hope that video helps you get one step closer to your consulting journey. But you don't have to take my word for it. Actually hear from someone who used this training to land multiple offers. In fact, I want to share with you the story of James, who actually used this training and then eventually landed 9 interviews and offers from various firms before choosing to work at Bain full-time. I'll link to James's video somewhere above my head so you can hear his story about how he used this training to land his 9 interviews and offers. All right, I'll see you in the next video.